On behalf of two of the film's producers here today, Stefan Wellink and Bob Fitzgerald, welcome to the Avoca Beach Theatre for the Australian cinema premiere of Pushing the Boundaries, the Mavis Bramston Show. Please be sure to remain seated for the celebrity panel discussion and a Q&A with cast members, which will take place immediately after the documentary film. Barry Creighton, one of the original stars of Mavis, who now lives in Los Angeles, regrets he can't be here today, but has recorded this message to introduce you to Pushing the Boundaries, the Mavis Bramston Show. Mr. Barry Creighton.
10 years ago, I lamented to Stefan Wellink that Channel 7 had done nothing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Mavis Bramston Show. Considering that Bramston was the single most revolutionary show of its time, and gave the 7 network ratings I doubt they've seen since, we both agreed this was a great oversight. Stefan, never one to waste a good opportunity, set about making this really terrific documentary. The result was an eye-opener to me. While I was aware of the social impact of the show, I was relatively unaware of the political impact. But we were, as you'll see, instrumental in relaxing Australia's deeply conservative values of the first half of the 20th century. To say that I'm forever grateful to the fates that made me a part of this show is an understatement. As is my gratitude to Stefan, which is actually boundless, for creating this revealing document of a vitally important moment in Australia's television history. I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I did.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. How do you do? Hello. The Mavis Bramston Show.
Hi everybody, I'm Andrew Mercado. Let's welcome our distinguished guest, the man who created that documentary for you, filmmaker Stefan Wellink.
Richard Walsh, one of our writers. Bob Fitzgerald, who edited that documentary, filmed it. Bill Harding, our schoolboy genius. What about Lucky Star? Please give them all a round of applause. Stefan, we might start with you. We saw in the documentary that this all started with a conversation with Barry Creighton. So how long ago was that? How many years have you spent making this documentary?
Thank you.
10 years ago?
Yeah, 10 years ago. And so it was sort of 50th anniversary, and Barry was very upset that no one was really recognising the significance of that Mavis Bramston show. And we talked a bit, and I said, has anyone ever made any documentaries on Mavis? And he said, not that he was aware of. And I said, well, I think it's probably worthwhile doing it. And I set out to do some research. And the more I got into it, the more I realised that it wasn't just about satire. It was much deeper than that. It was really holding up a mirror, I think, to all Australians to say, this is who we are, and be proud of it. And let's battle against this cultural cringe thing, you know, because we can be confident and we are very good at what we do. And let's keep these, as Don Chipp said, keep the bastards honest, you know, and really put on some shows that will make Australians think about who we are and what we are.
How many episodes do you reckon you watched of the Mavis Bramston Show? You went to the National Film and Sound Archive, sat in a little room. You watched a lot of it to try and select the best clips. How many hours do you reckon you watched?
I reckon I would have done, well, I watched every episode, so it was about 85 hours. I watched some more than once, so it's probably 100 hours of watching. Andrew joined me at one stage with David Sale. We had a great time hearing David talk about the memories that he had of some of those sketches. It was just a wonderful, wonderful period. But just watching the evolution of that show was quite amazing, you know. And as you heard in the film, it lost its bite after the first 2 years. I think they'd done all the satire that there was needed to be done, and it became became more of a variety show. It still held its rankings quite well on the ratings. It still, polled very, very well. But it wasn't the same. It then became more like Graham Kennedy's show or some of the other programs that were being played on TV. So it didn't quite have that bite anymore. But it was just a pleasure to do it.
I think one of the interesting things about watching episodes one after another during the day was you got to see, for me in particular, it was seeing that brilliance of Gordon Chater, seeing him play those characters week after week. The more you watched, the more you were sort of in awe of so many of the performers.
I think genius understates what he was. He was a brilliant man, I mean, he studied medicine originally at Cambridge University, and he was going to be a doctor, but he got involved with the Cambridge Footlights, and he went with it, and I'm glad he did. I think we're all glad he did. He was just an absolute genius. Yeah.
I'm curious, Richard Walsh, about your involvement in it. Were young people watching Mavis Bramston? I mean, I know that it was a huge TV hit and it had this wide range, but, you were sort of the anti-establishment. Were they watching Mavis Bramston every week as well?
I have no idea. The really sad thing, I might as well confess it right here, I didn't watch it. I mean, I didn't have TV. I mean, sure, we were paid every week, but I didn't actually have enough money to be able to own my own TV set. So occasionally I would watch, part of the enjoyment of watching the documentary is actually seeing some of my own work being performed, of course. And it was great fun. But yeah, I mean, watching TV was not, I mean, I was only 21 or something at the time, wasn't really something we were doing. I was studying and doing and writing for Mavis, but not actually watching very much TV.
So what then were the older people? What your parents, were they watching the show? What did they think of it, the older crowd?
My parents watched it and were disgusted. It shook them, but I mean, as the documentary makes clear, Australia was going through a remarkable change. I always say that we're about half a decade behind, and I always think that we shouldn't talk about the 60s and 70s. We should talk about 65 to 75, 75 to 85 is a better way of looking at things. And, even my parents, who lived on the North Shore and were very respectable, much more respectable than I've ever managed to be, they and their peers certainly watched it, and I think while they didn't approve, they understood that was where Australia was going. The things we were questioning, White Australia policy, the involvement in Vietnam, all the things you see there, I mean, they understood that all that was on the table and it was changing. They were opposed to change, it all changing too fast, but they knew that was, I mean, they knew the inevitability of that change, that the world of Robert Menzies and the church and the RSL was disappearing down the gurgler. They didn't want to hurry it up, but they were fascinated. I think that's the thing. They were fascinated by it.
Yeah, interesting. Naughty Catholic schoolboy Bill Harding here. I mean, was this a show that you were watching? Your parents were fine with letting you watch that? Were they aware that you were writing these skits and things?
Oh, yeah, they were aware of that. As I say, I think I did it. I just used to write these send-ups of TV, which I just was fixated by, and to show to my friends, and not to be performed or anything, but just for them to read in the playground. And then I saw a little ad that between when it was just in New South Wales and when it went national, where they were asking for scripts to be sent in. So I just sent the last one in that I'd done, and as it says in that thing, I was watching the TV. We didn't have a phone, so I was watching the TV and just started to sort of hyperventilate, I think, probably. But yeah, and just on that idea of the Ampol shares and all that, Thomas Muldoon, who was the Archbishop who exhorted people to sell their shares, and he set the example of selling his. A few years later, I was driving across the harbour bridge with my boyfriend, and he rammed the back of our car, pissed. And he didn't mean to ram it, he just did. And as we were waiting for the tow truck to come and take his car away, mine was okay. He was steadying himself by putting his hand on my boyfriend's arse. So that was the man who sold the shares, you know. Yeah. So a class act he was.
Well, now I'm curious if your first skit was on TV when you were 15 and a half.
Yeah.
Did you then actually get invited to Channel 7? Were you in the writers' room? Did that start a process for you?
No, I don't think I've ever been in a writers' room, quite honestly. But no, I wasn't aware that they had one really. But no, I was at school and I'd just go and. I think it was just done through correspondence, really, and so I was sending quite a lot of stuff in, and they used some of it, and they didn't use the other. And there was a woman whose name I noticed on the cast, the credits at the end there, Mary Mears. I think she must have been production secretary or something or other. But so she was the one who, you know, sort of endured this correspondence with me, I think. But it was really when David Sale came on board, which was whatever it was, must have been 66. David used to have a writers' meeting in town for the likes of me and other people who were contributing, and he mentored me and all of that. So that's when I really started to write a lot for it.
Lucky, was it interesting for you being a singer, being asked to do comedy skits? Back in those days, were you pigeonholed? If you were a singer, were questions being asked that you were being asked to appear on a show and do something a little bit out of your genre?
I really have no idea how I finished up on Mavis Bramston. I really don't. I enjoyed being on the show, and I admired Gordon and Carol and June and Barry. Everybody was great. They were all friendly. But I had to learn a new song, like every week. And I was normally singing songs that I'd been singing for years and years and years. So it was quite difficult for me. I just had a new son. and had to stay up late at night, and while I was sitting waiting for Craig to start crying, I'd try and learn the script a bit. I was most probably keeping him awake. Yeah. But I loved the experience. I loved spending more time with. I knew Tommy Tico anyway, because Tommy had written most of my musical arrangements for me, and I met June. And as I said on the show, they used to pick me up. I lived at Neutral Bay. They'd pick me up on the way through, and June would run me through my lines for the show. And I'll always remember that very, very fondly. I loved the experience. I think it gave me another string to my bow.
Bob, I'm curious. I know there was there was always an urgency to make this documentary because there was concern that Carol was getting older, and there was a real sense of trying to get these stories down. How amazing was it working with them, and how great was their recall then when you got to the editing suite? You had a lot of material.
Yeah, well, we had I think probably about 20 hours of interviews, plus all of the shows. It's like any editing project. How do I whittle it down to a 90-minute show? And it took us about 3 months of solid editing to get the final film. And it certainly revived my youth, because I was 17 when the show went to air. Yeah. And I never really appreciated what it meant at the time. As far as the satire was, I didn't know what satire was, and I didn't realise at the time when I was 17 that it was the birth of satire on Australian television. So I kind of learned a lot by editing it about my own youth.
you talk about the fact that Channel 7 ignored the 50th anniversary of the show, and they'll ignore the 60th anniversary next year as well. I mean, what was so maddening about the fact that Channel 7 wouldn't even acknowledge that Mavis Bramston had been this big hit was that on the night that it began, on the night 50 years later, they were actually doing Dancing with the Stars, a live performance. It would have been 1 minute of the show for Daryl Summers to have had Carol Ray in the audience or someone and come over and say, 50 years ago tonight we made TV history, and they just didn't do that. I mean, I know you had difficulties trying to get Channel 7 to give you permission to do the clips. How did you get it across the line to convince them that this was a project worthy of their, finally giving you permission to do it?
They wouldn't release anything to us. Initially, they said their lawyers told them that they didn't own the copyright. And I said, well, then you're in trouble, because at the end of each show, it says copyright ATN Channel 7, then you might be in a lot of trouble. But they wouldn't give us anything. I had a lot of discussions with the archivist. We pitched it to very high up in 7. We were told we don't show these types of things anymore. They're not of great interest to the channel. Carol Ray, I know, wrote to Kerry Stokes, didn't receive a response. Asking him, why don't you put out a DVD, which I think we should push for that. There should be a DVD of a compilation of the Mavis Bramston Show. For Bob and I, if they could put our doco in there, that'd be nice, wouldn't it, Bob? We have the best. We have Sean Miller, who's he was voted last year the #1 entertainment lawyer. So I might get him to write a couple of letters. That might help us a bit. But no, I think it's disappointing. And the reason it was important to make this particular program, as it is for so many of the people who've done wonderful things, not just in entertainment but science, sport, you name it, is that after 5 years after retirement, they're forgotten. Nobody remembers, And in today's age, after 2 seconds, they're forgotten. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So I'm glad, Bob, we could last a distance and get the film made, and it's really an homage to all those people that you've seen, the people up here as well. We pushed hard on the writers. We wanted to include the writers because they don't often get a Guernsey in a documentary. Writers, do they, Bill? No. So we thought that was important. We added the producers in there. They all played a major role. But really, for me, this is for Carol Ray, really. It's thanks.
Sorry, one last thing. We did actually show the film to Carol in a very rough cut form, but she saw pretty much everything you saw. And she had just come back from the driving test. She was 98, and she just passed her driver's license that morning, and she was chuffed. And so we spent a day with Carol up in Kempsey.
Amazing. Studio audience, does anyone have a question? I'll bring a mic to you so you'll be heard. Lovely, thank you, sir.
Cheers. I can't help thinking that nowadays, particularly with commercial TV, they're just not interested in doing satire. They'll do reality TV, all those shows that I hate, that I don't watch because they're rubbish largely. Thank goodness for the ABC, who still have, a little bit of, sort of topical stuff on with, Charlie Pickering and Sean McAuliffe. But I'm wondering if the reason that commercial TV no longer do any sort of satire is because of political reasons about who owns the network when you're thinking about Mr. Murdoch and Kerry, whatever his name is, What's your idea on that thought?
I don't think it's the owners, I think it's the advertisers. I mean, all media today, fortunately, I work for books where we don't have advertising. We're the only part of the written creative industry other than cinema itself that doesn't rely on advertisers. Though, I mean, the hearing, you know, the pressure that Ampol came out under in those days, but it was just it was a totally different era. I did work in advertising for a couple of years. I'm very aware of how different it is today for the advertising industry to in my days in advertising. So the networks, as are the media, are much more aware of the power of the advertiser, and it's a little bit like politics. You know, the people. It doesn't matter how many people love it. If sufficient people hate it, then that's the problem. I mean, let's not talk about Australian politics. Let's talk about America. You can have extremists, the trumpets. They can stop America having a Speaker of Congress. You know, 6 people can stop that. That's how advertising works in this country. You just have, if people are prepared to go and complain at Woolies that a particular product is being advertised on a show that they don't like, it all goes pear-shaped. And so I think it's really the pressure of advertising. And of course, satire is expensive to write. I mean, I admire enormously what Pickering and Mikhailov do, but of course it is, as I say, on the ABC, where they're free from the pressure of advertisers. I think that's the problem.
There's also an issue with social media. You know, if you do a live comedy show now, you've got all these armchair critics that will say that's rubbish, and then the Daily Mail does a story. You know, no one will give a live comedy show a chance to find their feet anymore because social media will chime in. Anyone with a question from the audience? Here we go.
I just want whether you could sort of comment on the constant pressure, if you like, to come up with ideas. I mean, it seems to me now we just haven't got the script writers, whether they haven't got the will or the enthusiasm or whatever it is. It was just a golden time, a golden period in my opinion, and I'll never forget it. Thank you.
Well, I suppose in my particular case, because I was at school, I didn't really... I was at school for the entire time of Mavis Bramston, actually. I wasn't pressured in that sort of way, you know. I never saw the whiteboard. I just saw the blackboard. But so I was, even though I was probably writing more than I've ever written in my subsequent life, you know, I seem to be very prolific, which I certainly haven't been since. So I didn't have that kind of pressure at all. I was just sending things in at my own leisure, really. And so I don't know about that world at all, so no help at all on that one.
Don't ask me.
Question from the audience?
Yeah, one of the things I was wondering about, nowadays I know the people that do satire and comedy have to worry about legal implications. Did you guys ever have legal problems, getting sued and things like that?
According to Barry Creighton, there was an army of lawyers with Jim Osmond and others looking after their interests. I think there was some threat of litigation at various times, and they did sail close to the wind in those days. But no, they had lawyers that were ready if they needed them. So. I'm just wondering, you know, how you could, just back onto satire, how you can do satire effectively with cancel culture, you know, and that's one of the things I didn't have to worry about then, thank goodness. What's your view on that, Richard?
Well, first of all, on your film, I gave a fairly frivolous answer about my negotiations with Rags Henderson. Of course, the lawyers, and that was very much part of the problem, what I said that, you know, sometimes stuff that one wrote, they obviously had, well, in those days they had lawyers on staff and went through that process, and that was why I had to keep rewriting. Actually, I simplified, keep writing every hour. I'd ring up every hour to find out which ones had got through and which ones hadn't, so you keep on writing. You know, I think it's foolish for us to beat ourselves to death. I mean, the Pickering and Mikhailov material is very good. It's not, and they don't write it. I mean, both of them are script writers, but there's a team, a lot of people contributing to those programs, and they're all very talented. The problem is also to do with money. If I was as I was in those days, a young scriptwriter, as Bill was, he was even younger than me, you'd be working for radio, you'd be working for breakfast radio. There's a ton of satirical material that goes through, state by state, through radio, and those people are paid a lot more than Bill and I. As I say, Bill was still at school. I was basically hopping from couch to couch and not, as I say, being able to afford to even watch a TV set. But those people are paid a lot of money, and there are some very good scriptwriters. I think there's a lot of bad choices made in Australia about which scripts go forward when we're talking about films and television shows. But there's a lot of talent around. Let's not kid ourselves. And everything can be done. But a lot of people are choosing to use their talent to turn out very witty TikTok stuff and all kinds of stuff. So it's now very dispersed. When I was a kid, I think we in this country we have lots and lots of very talented cartoonists. When I was a kid, the Sydney Morning Herald had one cartoonist whose name was Molnar, and that was it. And I think Emile Mercer did the Sun or something. I mean, we have lots and lots of people, lots and lots of talent. We shouldn't get too silly about all this. There's a lot of it around. Much of it's being very well paid. People like Kathy Wilcox are not paid nothing for their talent today. There's a lot of good films being made, a lot of clips being made, a lot of kids making great stuff for Topfest and so on. It's all there, but it's being spread much more thinly, so we're not seeing it. There's not an Oz, there's not a Mavis. In those days, Oz and Mavis Bramston, if you wanted to write, that's what you did.
Questions, here we go.
I was 9 when the Mavis Bramston Show started and didn't get to see any of the early stuff till a bit later, but I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you guys for making this show, because it gave me the beginning of it, where I only got to see the end of it, and you've done a wonderful job. We don't celebrate our actors, our older people at all. It's important for people to know your stories, and you did a wonderful presentation of the story of the Mavis Bramston Show, so thank you very much. I'm sure we all appreciate it.
Well said. Anyone else? Here we are.
I just wanted to ask what's going to happen to that movie now.
It's going in December. It's been picked up by one streaming service called Docsville. It'll go international, and you'll be able to see it through Docsville in Australia. So, subscriber base. So that's been the only bite we've had so far. I've had it in, and it's with Amazon Prime at the moment too. So maybe they'll pick it up. You can never be sure. So I'm hopeful it'll get onto that as well. As for the others, very difficult. SBS said it's more for ABC, and guess what ABC said?
I was curious about Ron Fraser. My memory of the show was he must have been in it for quite a while. We didn't see a lot of him in the documentary, and I was wondering if he was there in that year of shows that has now been lost.
Yeah, I think part of it, yes.
I think Ron was a writer for it for a while before he. The first meeting I went to, where they were all sitting around the table in Anzac House in City, I think that was at the beginning of '66, and I think Ron was there as a writer. I think he was writing material before he sort of slid into being one of the regulars. That's vaguely how I remember it.
There was that decision, though, wasn't there, to concentrate that documentary because there was so much material on the very beginning of it, yes?
Yeah, because Mavis was at its best satirically in '64 and '65, and that's why we focused most of it on that. And we gave as many people as we could a Guernsey, but Ron Fraser, no doubt, is one of the greats of the past. There's no question about that. But thank you all. I think we've got to go.
I think we do. One last question, final one.
unusual question. Would it be beneficial in social media if we all start Googling to find out where it is so that people can actually be aware that it exists? As I said, an unusual question.
No, thank you, Annette. That's a good question. So would you all go home and start promoting this? We'll start a campaign, you know. I'm looking. We do have a Facebook group. That's right. We've got a web page as well for Mavis Bramston. I'm looking around the audience and I notice mostly grey hair, or like me, no hair. Bob and I have been joking for a while that the next film we make will be by the Zimmer brothers. You know, the Zimmer brothers. I think it's time for our era to strike back now. So I'm on a cane, as you can see, so I'm not too far from the Zimmer frame. But look, I just want to thank you on behalf of Bob and I and everyone here. Thank you so much for turning out. I know it's never easy to give up your Sunday afternoons, but we really appreciate that. And thanks for supporting independent film and independent cinema.
Yeah, thank you to the Avoca Beach Cinema. Thank you for coming, and give it up for our stars and writers remembering Mavis Bramston today. Thanks for coming, everyone.
And Andrew. Great job, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you.